Cleveland, 1905. John D. Rockefeller enters the Baptist church he's attended since he was 14, a church that's still full of blacksmiths and shopkeepers, people he's known his whole life. Things haven't been easy. That Tarbell woman's articles have turned the world against him. His family is suffering nervous conditions, his wife paralyzed by stroke, and an unknown disorder has caused all of his hair, including his eyelashes and eyebrows, to fall out. For years, he'd let people treat his estate like a public park, but now he's building a fence. Armed Pinkerton bodyguards follow him everywhere, and he sleeps with a revolver by his bed. Even that cowboy president Teddy Roosevelt is after him, despite how generous Standard has been to Republican politicians. But at least he feels safe here, at his church, where he gives Sunday school lectures and hands envelopes of money to parishioners who have fallen on hard times. His people. He doesn't see Ida Tarbell sitting a few pews away. Thanks so much to Ting Mobile for helping us keep the history flowing. Ida Tarbell's series, A History of the Standard Oil Company, ran in McClure's magazine until 1905, and it completely changed public attitudes about trusts and big business. Granted, when the big trusts like Rockefeller's Standard Oil and Andrew Carnegie's U.S. Steel were building themselves in the 19th century, they had caused a great deal of controversy within their industries on a state-by-state basis, but that anger and mistrust was unfocused. The business structures of these trusts were, often intentionally on the part of the trusts, difficult for the public to understand. Holding companies obscured the sheer scale of the trusts, and anti-competitive practices like railroad rebates and price fixing were so technical and detail-oriented, it was hard for individual citizens to pin down exactly what was wrong. Sure, there had been some legislative action on Standard, such as in 1892, for example, when the state of Ohio managed to use antitrust laws to separate Standard of Ohio from the rest of the company, but corporate reshuffles or protracted legal battles often blunted even these small victories. But now, Tarbell exposed how a network of 250 companies, many related in Byzantine deals, controlled everything from the price consumers paid for vegetables and alcohol to working conditions and hours across multiple industries. More importantly, though, it presented this information cleanly by centering the investigation on Standard, the one trust owned and controlled by a single man. This kept the story comprehensible and gave the readers a central character to rally against. In fact, often, she described Rockefeller and Standard as if they were the same entity, even after he had retired to focus on charity. And she decided to close the series with a two-part personal sketch of Rockefeller himself, which is where the usually reserved Tarbell let the venom flow. Describing him in church, she wrote that he looked like a living mummy, hairless and reptilian, powerful yet nervous, a ruthless king terrified of assassins who might be in his midst. But in actuality, Rockefeller was not the broken man Tarbell suggested. Even as his family suffered under the public strain, Rockefeller kept playing golf and running his charitable foundation. Granted, getting annoyed whenever a prominent religious organization turned away a donation of his as tainted money, but still, he stayed silent, believing the controversy would only grow if he dignified it with a response. It grew anyway. Tarbell's series sparked a national sensation. She exposed family secrets, like that Rockefeller's father, Doc Rockefeller, had fled New York with the family after being indicted for rape. A scandal that only deepened when her research assistant caught wind that Doc was still alive, living under an assumed name. So now finding Doc Rockefeller also became a brief national fixation, with publishing magnates Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst dispatching reporters as far away as Alaska to try and find the man. However, by the time they did, he was already dead. His poor widow, not realizing her marriage had been bigamous, and her husband's son, the richest man in America, had buried him under the assumed name of Livingston. With that minor side quest completed, the concepts of trusts and their impact on American life began becoming topics discussed at porches and town halls across the country due to Tarbell's articles. After decades of unfocused discomfort over monopolies, there finally seemed specific charges to answer and the political will to do something about the trusts. A public mandate that was a godsend to America's new president, Theodore Roosevelt. A reformer and longtime critic of trusts, Roosevelt had unsuccessfully attempted to pass anti-monopoly legislation in the past as governor of New York. But keep in mind, this was an era of the political machine, where party bosses held sway over elected and appointed officials in a dirty system of patronage and reward, which of course current society in America could never relate to today. Conservative Republicans in New York, plus the Democrats of the Tammany Hall machine, had hamstrung Roosevelt's progressive agenda, stonewalling his attempts to clean up state politics and enact antitrust laws. Because Republicans were the party of big business, and both they and the old guard at Tammany regularly took bribes and campaign contributions from Standard, specifically so they would kill unfriendly legislation. Indeed, the reason Roosevelt had been nominated as vice president in the 1900 Republican Convention was that New York Republicans hoped that they could get Roosevelt and his progressive reform campaigns out of New York politics. President McKinley was sure to win re-election, they reasoned, meaning Roosevelt would be neutralized in a subordinate role with little power. It worked. For a while. Because 5 months into McKinley's term, an anarchist shot and killed him. And Roosevelt could suddenly use the power of the executive branch to go after the trusts. So in February of 1902, 9 months before Tarbell's first Standard Oil article even appeared, Roosevelt took his first swing at the trusts. His target was the Northern Securities Company, a holding company created by the two largest rail competitors in the Midwest and West Coast, with financing by banking titan J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller. Their goal was to control all of the rail lines between the Great Lakes and the ports of the Pacific Northwest, a monopoly that, as we saw with Standard, could grant a huge amount of power to set prices and control commerce. Roosevelt's weapon was the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a rarely used piece of federal legislation which had been passed after a number of massive corporate mergers in the 1880s. The Sherman Act gave the federal government power to break up any organization or contract found to be restraining trade, and had mostly been used against unions. Roosevelt instructed the Justice Department to sue and break up Northern Securities as an illegal combination. And when the department followed through, Northern Securities then appealed the decision and entered a protracted court battle. Now, Roosevelt had gone out on a limb for that fight, particularly because a significant part of his own party were pro-business and financially dependent on the trust heads. In fact, a group of conservative Republicans even revolted against him, openly plotting to nominate one of their own in the 1904 election and make this cowboy a one-term president. It was a bruising political season for Roosevelt. Actually, quite literally in a way, because, fun fact, while all this was going on, he'd also taken up a form of stick fencing that regularly left him with black eyes, welts, and cuts on his hands, but that's beside the badass point. Because he was not done. He was just getting started. That year, he personally intervened in a coal miners' strike, mediating between the miners and J.P. Morgan to strike a bargain that raised wages and limited hours, but prevented the formation of a union. And then in 1903, with the swell of support from Ida Tarbell's articles, he moved on a much more ambitious set of bills. He wanted to create a Department of Commerce and Labor with an investigative agency called the Bureau of Corporations that would monitor and inspect companies for antitrust violations. In addition, he wanted to give more power to the already existing Interstate Commerce Commission and pass a law preventing railroads from giving rebates that diverted from published rates. All of this would give him the tools to go after the trusts on a broad scale. Congress was not cooperative. Republicans tried to prevent the proposal from coming to a vote, and many Democrats, hoping to paint Roosevelt as pro-trust, felt he didn't go far enough. But both parties said there simply wasn't enough time in the spring congressional session for this discussion. So Roosevelt used the bully pulpit. He threatened to call a special session, which would keep the congressmen from going home. And he engaged the press, letting it be known that Rockefeller had sent out telegrams to a number of Republican senators calling in favors from a lifetime of financial gifts. Oh yeah, the public uproar was enormous. Newspapers speculated which senators had been bought by Rockefeller and the trusts. Reporters bombarded senators' offices, and gradually, Roosevelt got his votes. In a last-ditch attempt to scuttle the laws, Standard Oil sent a team of lawyers to D.C. with instructions to draft an amendment that would blunt the bills and pass it to their Republican allies. But then Pulitzer's New York World found out about this, and the lawyers fled the Capitol with reporters on their heels. Roosevelt had his Bureau of Corporations, his legislation, and the next year, his first victory. The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the government had been right to break up the Northern Securities Company. The era of trust busting had begun, and John D. Rockefeller would become the richest fugitive in America. And while I'm sure he would have been able to afford an exorbitant phone bill while on the move, if cell phones were a thing back then, just follow me down this rabbit hole. Rockefeller, I most certainly am not, which is why I was excited to hear about the new and improved Ting Mobile. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I looked at my phone bill was not a pleasant experience. Oh boy. So then, I started looking into Ting, which runs on the same nationwide LTE and 5G networks as my old provider. When I switched, I would get to keep my old number. And this is the really good part I found. I could cut my phone bill nearly in half. And look, honestly, at first, I didn't believe it either. But then our studio director and resident statistics lover, Jeff, just switched to Ting as well. And not only did he tell me it was super easy, he said he was on the phone with an actual human within around 25 seconds, which in this day and age is nuts. But he also crunched the numbers and figured out that his family would be saving around $50 a month or $600 a year for his 2 phones and data on his iPad. And that's because you can choose the plan that's right for you. With their Flex plan, you get unlimited talk and text for just $10 a month. Then only pay $5 a gig for data when you use it, which is pretty sweet actually considering how much we're around Wi-Fi. They also have their Set 5 plan for $25 that includes 5 gigs up front for if you know you're going to be on the go. And then there's my personal favorite, the unlimited talk, text, and data plan for just $45 a month, because I'm still like 40 episodes behind on Critical Role. Plus, switching is super easy. Just head to extracredits.ting.com to check your phone compatibility, create an account, and pick the plan that's right for you. And actually, using that link will also get you a $25 service credit to try Ting with no strings attached. They'll send you a SIM card you pop in your phone, you'll be saving some cash while helping support our channel, and up and running in no time. I don't want to brag, but Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Muscha, Dominic Valenciana, Gunnar Clovis, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels1 are fantastic legendary patrons.